Hey, welcome to another episode of the Unnamed Bracketology podcast. I'm Graham Doran, and I'm joined here, as always, by my good friend Kerry Miller, and we're just going to get right into it. We're after the holidays now. We've had Christmas, we've had New Year's, and we've got a few different topics to get going on. So, the first one, let's talk about the one seeds. I think it's clear Auburn, number one overall, Tennessee, number two overall. Probably no argument there, Kerry.
No argument whatsoever. But I do have to gotta take my shot real quick. Starting the new year off right. Oh, nothing but net.
Nothing but net, technically. So not the worst shot I've ever seen.
But no,
Um,
it's Auburn. Auburn won. Auburn just unanimously won. I know they're not in the AP poll, but who cares about the AP poll? And yeah, Tennessee too. Like you texted me, who are the one seeds, and you sent a list of six possible teams, and Auburn and Tennessee weren't even on there because there's no debate. And I agree.
so getting into the debate, where do you have those final two spots, number three, number four, and why?
So I have Iowa State at three, Duke at four, and I think a lot of people have been in that exact same boat. The 35 or so of us who are doing bracketology in December and early January. Iowa State's only loss was a nail biter against Auburn on a neutral floor. Oh, there's my dog. Um, and they've looked really good. I mean, kind of struggled early in the second or in the first half in that game against Colorado in their Big 12 opener, but then just came back and kind of throttled them, just like they destroyed Colorado in the Maui Invitational. I think they're solidly, like, not just resume wise. I think they legitimately are one of the four best teams in the country. I think they can win the Big 12 for sure. And then Duke beat Auburn. Granted, that was at home, but all the predictives love Duke. All the ESPN analysts love Duke, so that helps them as well. Joking, obviously, helps as much as the AP poll. But their only losses, neutral court to Kentucky and Kansas, both of them kind of not a big deal really whatsoever. Quad one for sure. So solid teams, but yeah, there are definitely other candidates. I mean, Florida undefeated is right there. Alabama's got a very, very strong profile after playing one of the toughest non-conferences out there. Who else did you have on the list? Marquette and Oregon. I think they're a little bit further behind those other SEC teams, but I'm just going to throw it back to you with how ridiculous is it that Alabama is the fourth best team in the SEC at six overall on our seed list?
I mean, I will say I actually have Alabama fifth overall as
Okay.
my best two seed, and I can see an argument for them as a one seed. I also actually have Marquette sixth. I really think Marquette's getting a sneaky good profile now. And part of that's just because they can win on the road. That's a team that has actually gone out and proved that. A lot of teams in the country haven't. And you look at what they did against Iowa State. Well, going to Ames is if there's any loss to write off, it's going to Ames. They do have that quality win at Maryland as well. So I think when I look at Marquette, I'm starting to see a very similar profile to Alabama, which is just waiting for somebody to fall from that one seed line, and then they can move on up. Florida actually does concern me a little bit, and the only reason for that is North Carolina on a neutral court is their best win of the season. So, if you look at the metrics, they all look good. Obviously, they're undefeated. A lot of reasons to really like Florida, but when you actually look at the quality of their wins, they look better on paper in the quad system than they really are. And I think that's a little bit of a concern for Florida as far as how they match up with these other teams. Oregon has an excellent opportunity to get to the one line. They just need to win two games this week. If they win their next two, they're going to be a one seed. I think it's just within 1 week they've got the opportunity to get there because they would just have too much of an overwhelming profile. Am I sold on Oregon? No. This is still the team that needed a miracle to beat Portland at home. But man, at some point, if you just win, and I think that's where Oregon's at, they are right on the cusp of one seed if they can actually win.
Yeah, I think I've been just in the back of my head holding Oregon back because they have that loss at home to UCLA. And at that point, it's not that that head to head makes that much of a difference, but I kind of want to have UCLA ahead of Oregon as the Big Ten projected champ. And that just makes me want to hold back. I actually ended up with Oregon exactly one spot ahead of UCLA in my last projection. So I kind of ignored that head to head result from that regard. But Yeah, that's the only reason I haven't given them a whole lot of consideration. But yeah, they have four quad one wins. They do have the just that one loss to UCLA. So yeah, I think they're definitely close. I've just been reluctant to see it because of the UCLA result.
Let's move on to the Mountain West. Last year, they had a record 6 bids into the tournament field. This year, it doesn't look like they're going to land 6 bids. When you're looking at the Mountain West, obviously, I think we both agree Utah State's in excellent shape. Let's kind of start there. What kind of seed do you think Utah State could potentially be looking at this season?
Yeah, so after they beat Nevada right before New Year's Eve on here on the East Coast, I tweeted that out that they have four quad one wins, six quad one, quad two wins. In both regards, they were one of just five teams in the country in those boats. They did lose at home to UC San Diego. That's not great, but at the time I said like, oh, it feels like they're pushing up against the door to a four seed, and then like that went viral or whatever. And all the Utah State fans were like, well, if you're a bracketologist and you say we're a four seed, we're going to be an eight seed. And I appreciated that since we were all off by like three seeds on every Mountain West team last year. But I mean, they're really good. And they were what, like 12th when the initial net rankings came out? Like they were one of the biggest surprises aside from Pittsburgh. And they've backed it up in a huge way. I can't believe they won back to back to back on the road against St. Mary's, San Diego State, and Nevada. And granted, Nevada's not as good as we thought they were going to be. But that's still, you know, you don't just walk into Reno and walk out with a win.
Yeah, I think that's what's really impressed me the most with Utah State is of their 6 quad 1 and 2 wins, 3 of them are on the road in true road games, and 3 of them are on neutral courts. Not a single win that they've posted yet or in the top 2 quads is at home. And yeah, of course, they lost to UC San Diego. I think that holds them back a little bit, but that's a really impressive resume. I think there's almost no realistic path for them to miss the tournament at this point. I have them as my best 6 seed at 21st overall. I really don't see them getting above like a 4 seed at max. Maybe if they just went absolutely rampage through the Mountain West, then we could see something like a 3 seed or maybe even a 2 seed if they were to win out. But just realistically, I don't think that's going to happen.
Mhm.
So I think their realistic max is probably a 4 seed. But I think it would have to be something very similar to what we've been seeing with Memphis, which is all of a sudden they're starting to win games impressively too. So those efficiency metrics improve along the way. So it's not just about adding the quality wins. It's about getting those efficiency metrics up. So yeah, Utah State I think could be up to a 4 seed, but right now top 6 seed for me. Who else from the Mountain West do you think is a legitimate tournament contender?
I think it's really just San Diego State. I was looking at their top five teams right now, net wise at least. San Diego State at 46, barely top 50. Boise State 51, Nevada 65, New Mexico 76. And Nevada's resume metrics is terrible. Like across the board, they've done nothing. They have six losses already. They're not going to get in. I don't really think there's any chance for them to get in at large at this point. Sorry, my dog will not stop drinking. Um, New Mexico is not top 50 in any metric. I mean, they have that nice win over UCLA. They could, if they catch fire like they did last January, I think they could maybe still sneak in, but they're not even in the conversation right now, in my opinion. And Boise State has not done enough either, really. They're probably like if I actually seeded beyond my first five out, they'd probably be in like the 10th out range, something like that, like not that close. And even San Diego State, like they're like 9, 10 seed range. So it really does feel like you said, Utah State, I feel like they would have to really crash and burn to miss the tournament. And based on what they've shown thus far, it's hard to believe they're going to do that. I do appreciate that Memphis comparison as we intentionally waited until the end of the Memphis Florida Atlanta game to record this because those games were always wild last year. But yeah, I think it's probably a two bid league, which heading into the season, right? Nobody in the Mountain West was like top 40 in any of the metrics. Obviously that's not resume metrics, but like, Ken Palm, Torvik, Haslametrics, BPI, I think maybe Norlander's rankings, maybe he had one of them in the top 40 or something, but it was not supposed to be a multi-bid league, even though we know that the Mountain West is supposed to be a multi-bid league. So I think they get two. I wouldn't be blown away by three, but there's no way they're getting six again.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's two is probably the most likely result, but three I don't think is far behind that. I actually do think New Mexico is a bubble team right now as we speak. And I know that literally none of their metrics indicate that. They even have a 58 resume average right now. So, from a metric standpoint, no indication that New Mexico should be on the tournament radar. But they do have a neutral court win against UCLA. They also have a 4-2 record against quads 1 and 2. So, I mean, if you think about that, like teams are almost always assured of a tournament bid if they win twice as much in the first two quads as they lose. I know that New Mexico State loss is very bad, but they remind me kind of of that Dayton team in 2022 that the committee, despite not having the metrics that go along with it, the committee liked that Dayton beat Kansas on a neutral court early in the year. And then they were just good overall in quads 1 and 2, 3-2 against quad one. I think New Mexico is building that kind of a profile where if they just keep winning enough in the top two quadrants, they could sneak into the field. And of course, I'm not counting Boise State out either with their Clemson win and also neutral court against St. Mary's. So, yeah, I think it's really kind of those four. I think Nevada, now that they have three losses outside the first two quadrants, it's really, I wouldn't even call them a long shot. They're almost needing a miracle at this point. Too much
Yeah.
damage, I think. What do you think?
Yeah, no, Nevada's done. And that's shocking. I mean, what was it our first pod that we were talking about the Charleston Classic, right? And we were looking forward
Yep.
to which of Miami, VCU, or Nevada was going to prove that it was most worthy of a bid, and turns out it was Drake. All three of those other teams just completely crashed and burned. But yeah, Nevada, what's their resume metrics average is 125. That's it's going to be hard to make up that gap and get back into the top 50, which is about where you almost have to be an at-large candidate. So, yeah, I can't see any path to Nevada getting back into it. Like you said, they already have three bad losses. They don't have any quad one wins. Like it's a mess, and it's a shame because that's usually a pretty fun team to watch. But yeah, back Boise State, New Mexico again. I think they both have a chance, but they're both outside the top 50 in all of the metrics, which is why I don't really have a strong inclination to really put them in the conversation right now.
Moving on to some teams that should, at the end of the year, be closer to the top of the bracket, but are kind of some bigger question marks right now. What are you doing with Gonzaga and Houston? Both kind of some interesting profiles.
Yeah, I mean, I keep wanting to drop Gonzaga further than I do. Um, and I don't know if part of that is still me remembering last year when they were on the bubble until like mid-February, and I'm just like downplaying them a little bit, or if it's that they just haven't been that good since their, season opening desolation of Baylor. I mean, obviously that was a very strong resume win, a great looking win. They haven't done much of anything since then outside of that win at San Diego State. I mean, I know you had been tweeting about it before the new year. Like if they didn't beat UCLA, they had no path to a one seed. I think you're right, especially as bad as St. Mary's is right now. The WCC is probably a one bid league. St. Mary's, Washington State, they're right on the bubble there. San Francisco is kind of in the conversation too, but it's almost it's like Duke in the ACC if Pitt doesn't exist. Like there's just no great opportunities. It's just nothing but landmines the rest of the way, and they just don't have those quality wins yet. But metrically, did I just make up a word? They're top eight in all the predictive metrics, and their resume metrics are at least good. So it keeps them as a 4 or 5 seed. And as long as they are a 4 or 5 seed, they're probably going to be in the West region and playing in Seattle. So what do they care at that point if they're 3 or 6? As long as they get that kind of home court advantage, which for whatever reason Gonzaga always seems to get. I shouldn't say for whatever reason because there's never teams
That's
Northwest
it.
that
There's just
that want
no
that. They should
good teams in the
they should
West most
stop
of the
putting
time.
pods out there.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think Gonzaga's right on that 4-5 line. I have them 16th overall now. They were 15th overall until Memphis was so impressive against FAU. And I actually have Houston right behind them now at 17th overall, my best 5 seed. And I find Houston really hard to place as well because everything Gonzaga is, Houston's even a little bit more in both directions. So their resume metrics are worse by actually a pretty significant margin compared to Gonzaga's, but they're also even a little bit better in the efficiency categories. Like they're at 2.7 average in the efficiency metrics. That's like a 1 seed right now is what the efficiency metrics think of them. But if you look at their resume, they really don't have anything. I mean, a 50.3 resume metric average for Houston, they're 1-3 against quads 1 and 2, like plenty of time to make up. They'll have opportunities in the Big 12, and I think they will climb the seed list. But right now, I just can't place them any higher than 17th. And even that, I think, is really generous.
Yeah. I think I have them as my bottom 3 seed, and even at that, I don't like it. I feel like they should be lower than that because they haven't shown us a good win yet. Did win at Oklahoma State, but even in that, that's not a good win. That might be the worst team in the Big 12.
I think
And they only
almost
scored,
inarguably the worst team in
yeah,
the
and
Big
they only
12.
scored what, 60 points, which is my concern with Houston. I mean, I think in our first pot of this season, like that was one of the teams that I was really questioning. Like, can they score enough without Jamal Shed? Like even with Jamal Shed last year, could they score enough? And now it's even more of a question. Is Emmanuel Sharp going to keep shooting 50% from 3-point range? And can they get to 65 points in any given game when he doesn't? Like it's a very Virginia 2015 to 2018 type of thing, not the 2019 Virginia team that won it all, that was absolutely elite on offense. Like I just don't see it from Houston this year. But when they beat teams, aside from that Oklahoma State game, they destroy them, which is why their predictive metrics are so strong. And because they've been so good for the last 8 years, and there's still that preseason data baked into some of those, certainly the Ken Palm and BPI numbers, maybe not so much the net. We'll never know what all is baked into the net, but I think when you watch them, it feels like you're watching a top 5 team just from the way they defend, the way they can just annihilate opponents, but they don't have those wins. Like it's kind of, like North Carolina from 2 years ago, where it's just like we're just perpetually waiting for them to get that quality win that never comes. Or Wake Forest last year, right? They were like 20th in the net and on Ken Palm, and just are you ever going to beat anyone? And we all assume Houston will, but you're asking right now where do we put them, and I don't know. I think I have them at 12.
Yeah, I have the same concerns still about Houston's offense. We flagged that early on, but something that I thought was concerning if I'm a Houston fan is not just the coach speak from Kelvin Sampson about, hey, you got to be able to play defense. Defense is what separates teams. Like I get all that, but after the Oklahoma State game, it was almost to the point where it wasn't, oh, we had a bad shooting night or we just weren't on tonight. It was defenses, and it was only about the defense. And I think it was really almost the way he said it was an implicit understanding. At least that's the way I took it, as he really doesn't trust his offense either. Not that they had a bad night, not that defense needs to carry you on nights when it's not clicking. I just don't think he thinks his team has a great offense. How they're that high in the efficiency metrics, I think, is really just born out of beating up on teams that have no ability to hang with Houston whatsoever. I've seen nothing out of Houston's offense that makes me think they're one of the top teams in the country. I do think they'll probably end up landing a 3 seed, maybe a 2 seed, maybe even a 4 seed in the tournament, but I just don't see them as being a true national championship contender, even if the efficiency metrics seem to think they're one of those teams.
No, I agree. And that's part of why I feel like Iowa State is probably the favorite to win the Big 12, and really a top 5 team, is like in comparison to the Big 12 teams who are supposed to be elite. I'll let shit on Kansas here for a little bit if you want to, but like, Houston, Kansas, Iowa State, they're the top 3 seeded team. Well, I guess probably Baylor's a little bit ahead of Kansas now, but those teams just, and even Baylor, like when they don't show up, they really don't show up. So it feels like Iowa State could almost run away with this league. I don't want to say that's my prediction, but it wouldn't shock me if Iowa State went like 16-2.
Iowa State's got it clicking much more quickly than the other teams in the Big 12. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I do think Iowa State's going to win the league. And I think I agree with you. It might not be particularly close just because they make it so easy on themselves by not just playing defense, but now they've got an offense. This is a new development for Iowa State. They are a much better offensive team than they've been previously with Otzelberger. So a legitimate national title contender, and I wouldn't have said that before the season.
No, I definitely would not have either. I'm amazed at how good their offense has been. I mean, Curtis Jones coming off the bench. I know anytime, it used to be Syracuse's sixth man back in the day. There's always somebody who comes off the bench and averages like 16 points per game. This year it's Curtis Jones at Iowa State, but he's coming off the bench because they got Taman Lipsey and Keyshawn Gilbert, and they have front court guys who can actually score now, which was not the case last year. Still got Momcilovic. I mean, they're really good, man. And watching that game against Colorado, even when it was close, it just felt like Colorado was somehow winning by smoke and mirrors, early in that game. And it just felt inevitable that the Cyclones were going to come back and eventually win by double digits, which they did.
Sticking with the Big 12, let's kind of turn to the opposite side of the league. Instead of the championship side, let's look at the bubble picture. Who do you trust more to get an NCAA tournament bid? The combination of BYU and UCF, or the combination of Arizona and Texas Tech?
Can I just say that I hope that BYU is not on the bubble because it is so hard already with so many SEC teams to make a legal bracket. But I think it probably is BYU and UCF. I mean, Texas Tech doesn't even have a quad two win yet, let alone quad one. Um, I think that I already had them as, I believe, my bottom 10 seed before they lost to UCF, which then they kind of swapped places, right? UCF now in, Texas Tech now out. And Arizona, you know, predictive metrics wise, they're still top 20 across the board. They don't have those wins yet. And I think that I believe in Arizona more than I believe in Texas Tech. But if I'm picking, you know, of those two Boolean options, I would probably go BYU and UCF because I think both of them could get in. And I think Texas Tech might just not be that good this year.
Yeah, agree with you on Arizona over Texas Tech, and I like BYU more than UCF. That said, UCF has the Texas A&M win, which is now looking very good, kind of like we thought it would in the preseason, but that's grown up into a really good win. And then we also saw them win on the road at Texas Tech. So, yeah, I think UCF clearly has the best resume currently of all those teams. I have them as a 10 seed. But do I think they're the worst team? Probably. But then again, they just beat Texas Tech in Lubbock. So maybe they are better than the Red Raiders. I'm not quite sure on that one. I think I might go with the combo of BYU and UCF ever so slightly over the combo of Arizona and Texas Tech, even though I think Arizona and Texas Tech's probably a better 1-2 duo, just because Arizona's shot themselves in the foot so much with an 0-5 quad one record. And then Texas Tech, again, playing another awful out of conference strength of schedule, and then not even performing that well against it, dropping that game in New York. So with Texas Tech, I think they have a pretty steep climb, not unlike what they did last year, except they started out with a home loss to UCF. It's not going to get easier, and then the Big 12 than that sort of game. So tough road for Texas Tech, but I do like Arizona's path in an odd way for a team that's 0-5 against quad one. I mean, first off, they do have a win over TCU, so that's quad two. But if they can go 500 against quad one from here on out, they're looking at probably like a 5-10 record against quad one. And then I think if you compare that to Michigan State last year, Michigan State was a predictive metric monster, and they were 3-9 against quad one. I think Arizona could be the same sort of team, right? If they're sitting there at 5-10, or maybe even like 4-11 against quad one, but they have awesome efficiency metrics, they might just get that same treatment from the committee.
So I will say, I earlier said it wouldn't surprise me if Iowa State goes 16-2. I forgot the Big 12 is on a 20-game schedule now, but that is part of my concern with Arizona. They already have those 5 losses all out of conference play, right? That's the big problem because now they need to go probably 13-7 in league play, right? To get that 5-10 record against quad one. So can they do it? I mean, based on the predictive metrics, sure. Based on how Caleb Love has decided to shoot the ball against quality opponents, no. So I think they're an interesting team that needs to at least be mentioned as a bubble candidate, even though they're like 80th in the resume metrics, just because they are top 25 in all the predictives. But I think they have a very, very steep climb ahead of them. Whereas these other teams, UCF, we don't think they're as good. Neither do the predictive metrics think they're as good, but they've at least built themselves up. Like they can play 500 ball the rest of the way and get in comfortably. Whereas Arizona needs to be like 5, 6, 7 games over 500 to get it done.
Yep. Let's close it out with two topics from some people online. Number one, do you feel comfortable at this point with where your bracket is compared to what the final thing is going to look like? Or at what point of the season do you start to feel like, you know what, this bracket is probably most of the teams in the tournament are going to be in this bracket? When do you kind of start to get comfortable like that?
Hmm. Whenever I decide to get my whiteboard ready, I by no means am I comfortable with it right now. I mean, I wouldn't even call anybody a lock at this point. I know some people has JBR started doing his locks yet? I don't know. I know he started
I
eliminating
think he
teams,
won't
which
do
is fair to
anybody
do.
until later this month, but Auburn's going to be there pretty much instantly, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's probably the one team, and even they could go like 6-12 in the SEC. Like that's just how. Not that I think Auburn possibly would, but no, it's probably around Valentine's Day, right? Around Super Bowl Sunday when most people start paying attention is when it feels like that's the bracket that it could be. At that point, it's more so teams shuffling around. I think with about a month left, it feels like about half the field is set. But yeah, right now, not at all. So much can change in one week.
Yeah, I so actually looked back at where my bracket was for New Year's last year, and I only had 6 teams in the top 11 seed lines that ended up not making the tournament that were in my bracket. So it was more than I thought it was going to be. The others, so am I getting comfortable now? Probably just because that's what the math says. The math says most of our teams who've established themselves into the bracket have done it through either results or predictives or combination of both. So at this point, like, yeah, most of the field is actually pretty set. Like, you're not going to see a whole lot of teams, falling out from a 5 seed to out of the tournament. Could it happen? Absolutely. But it would be a surprise for any of those teams to fall that hard. And then speaking of February, I looked back at a tweet from February of last year where I mentioned looking back at the previous tournament for 2023 that all of the teams that were in the top 33 of the resume metrics at that point had made the 2023 tournament. And then predicted last year that all of the top 33 teams would likely do it again, except for possibly Ole Miss, because they had really bad predictive metrics, even though they kept seemingly winning games all the time. And then, of course, all 33 make it except for Ole Miss. They were the one that fell out of that point. But yeah, I think once you get to like February, losing a game doesn't even necessarily move you anywhere on the seed list, let alone like dropping an actual line. Sometimes you don't even change the overall seed at all. So I think right now we're still at the stage where, one game can have a pretty big effect on some teams. But even now, like you mentioned earlier with Gonzaga, and I found myself doing this with Kansas. Like I wanted to drop Kansas very hard. I wanted to drop Gonzaga very far. It's just one game's not going to change a ton at this point, even, right? Like this isn't November anymore. We're into January, so each game starts having less and less of a cumulative effect. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty comfortable right now. And moving on to the last topic, speaking of Kansas, we got a question about When will there be sunny days for the Kansas Jayhawks? When are things going to get better? And I'll let you take a crack at it, and then I'll go after that.
Oh no, poor little Kansas hasn't won a title in 3 years. I will going back to the like when you're comfortable. I do feel like conference wise, I feel comfortable at this point, right? It feels like the SEC is going to be a 12 or 13 bid league. It's moving towards the Big Ten being a 10 bid league. Big East is probably four at most, it feels like. Like that's where I start to get comfortable at this point in the year now that non-conference play is almost completely over. There's still a one-off game here or there, but specific team-wise, a lot can still change. But Kansas, man, KJ Adams needs to step up. He needs to be their Kevin McCullough Jr. and he doesn't want to be their Kevin McCullough Jr. And like it can't all be Hunter Dickinson because often nights it's not. Like when he was awesome early in the year against North Carolina and Michigan State, when he was looking like the National Player of the Year, that's when Kansas felt like the favorite to win it all. And then he played horribly against Creighton, didn't do anything the other day against West Virginia. Like he can't be the only guy doing it for them. And like maybe it doesn't have to be Adams, maybe it has to be AJ Storr, maybe it just has to be somebody. But coming into the season, right? The big three was Dickinson, Adams, and DeJuan Harris. And Harris is he's not elite by any means, but Adams has not been that guy who wants to take over games, and I think that's killing them more than anything.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think it's a lineup issue, and this is nothing against KJ Adams. I mean, the guy is somebody that works really hard, flies all over the court, but you cannot have a guy like DeJuan Harris at point guard and then a guy like KJ Adams and just let the defense collapse on Hunter Dickinson. Like, you just can't do that. There has to be some sort of threat out there at the wing level, and KJ is just not working well in that regard. I think to me the move is very clear what I would try to do if I was Bill. I would put Flory Badunga in and try to do a Twin Towers situation, which has worked for Kansas in the past. In 2008, they had Darrell Arthur and Darnell Jackson, two big guys on the floor at the same time. In 2012, they went to the national title game again, that time with Thomas Robinson and Jeff Withey. It can be done. Self has done it before. And I think, is this the lineup he wants to run with? No, I don't think he wants to do Badunga and Dickinson at the same time. But I think the hand's kind of been forced. Mayo is scoring, but he needs help on the wings. And I think the only real alternative, because Storr isn't there right now, and Rylan Griffin might not be getting there either, is to do Badunga and Hunter Dickinson because it makes it a matchup nightmare for whoever you're playing.
Yeah, I mean, just look at Michigan, what they're doing with their 2 7-footers. I mean, if you can get the offense running in that way, do it. And like you said, he's done it before. Like it's not like he's having to reinvent the wheel or anything. And yeah, I mean, to your point, like I don't hate KJ Adams by any means, but he's a role player. Like he's not the number two guy that they're trying to force him to be. He's just not going to be accepting that role. And what you're saying, like about with Zeke Mayo, when he had 27 in that game against West Virginia, he probably gave up 27 on the other end too. That's the problem. You know, if you're going to have a Dalton Connect type guy who can score 20, 25 points, you need the rest of the defense to be elite around him. And I don't think Kansas is quite there this year.
Yep. Well, thank you again for another great episode, everybody. We're going to go to once a week from here on out, and then we're going to go 2 times a week once we get closer to March. But thank you again, and I'll turn it over to Kerry to say goodbye.
All right, go Chiefs.